Hello everyone and welcome to East Ayrshire's Violence Against Women conference. I would have loved to have been able to deliver my speech today in a room full of people and the audience saturated with men. However, during these not so unique circumstances we find ourselves in, I find myself grateful that through technology I am able to deliver it using this digital platform. By the way of introduction, for people that don't know me, I'm Jim McMahon, Cabinet Member with responsibility for older people and community safety. I am East Ayrshire Council's rep on the Community Justice Ayrshire Board, Valuation Joint Board, and among many other positions, I am East Ayrshire Council's White Ribbon Champion. It's in my capacity as Ambassador for White Ribbon Scotland and my lived life experience that I would like to talk about to open the conference today. The first White Ribbon campaign was launched by a group of men in Canada after the brutal mass shooting of 14 female students at the University of Montreal. 2 years later, 1993, a group of men in Toronto decided they had a role and a responsibility to speak out and act against men's violence against women. So with very little preparation, 100,000 men wore a white ribbon that year and many more were drawn into the discussion. The White Ribbon campaign has now become an annual awareness event and starts on the 25th of November. The campaign is now recognised as the world's largest effort of men and boys working to end violence against women as part of a larger effort towards gender equality. In 2008, the campaign took place in 57 countries around the world and in excess of 800,000 ribbons were distributed, challenging everyone to speak out and think about their own beliefs, action and language, educating young people, especially young men and boys, on the issue. Raising public awareness on the issue of men's violence against women, and by accurately naming it, men's violence against women and girls, then the process has started where men are held accountable and responsible for their actions. Men's violence against women and girls is not just a woman's issue or a man's issue. This is a bigger society-wide issue. It's not just about breaking down the testosterone-driven male masculinity and the right to privilege, but it's much more about the empowerment of women and reclaiming safe space. It's much more about support and intervention for women as it is about the education, awareness and prevention for men. Therefore, what with men and boys must be gender transformative, including discussions about gender norms and how these influence behaviour. Focusing on the strength-based approach, where we can demonstrate positive examples of masculinity rather than just highlight the negative. The number of charges reported in 2019 to 20 is highlighted and is the highest number reported since 2015-16. It's 5.7% higher than the number reported in 2018-19. The majority of those accused of domestic abuse are males. In 2019 to 20, 88% of the charges reported with domestic abuse identified were cases in where the accused was a male. Accepting the role offered to me as Ambassador by David Thompson, the Campaign Director of White Ribbon Scotland, has given me further opportunities to get the message out there loud and clear that domestic abuse and violence against women should never be and will never be tolerated. I take the opportunity whenever possible to attend events to urge men who are likewise minded to go online to the White Ribbon Scotland page and to sign that pledge, because it is men that can make the difference. Checking their own behaviour when responding to sexist jokes. It would be easy to laugh along with the rest of your mates, but you ask them just pause for a minute and think, and with the use of subtle language, compare that sexist joke to a racist joke that they wouldn't laugh at. And I say to men to try and be that good influence to other men that surround you. Signing the pledge and my appointment as a White Ribbon Champion was an easy decision for me, and that pledge is that I would never commit, condone, remain silent about violence against women in all shapes and forms. The violence may come in the form of physical abuse, sexual, emotional and psychological and coercive controlling behaviour. So, during the 16-day campaign to end all gender-based violence, which as we all know runs from the dates I had stated previously, then I will work tirelessly with our colleagues from Women's Aid and other partners through our media outlets to raise awareness and give the issue as high a profile as possible. November 2019, to launch the 16-day campaign, I was in Edinburgh on the 25th, where the NHS Health Scotland, COSLA and Improvement Service held a national conference with support from Public Health Reform Team and National Violence Against Women Network to address violence against women as a public health issue, and was delighted to hear it was to be treated as one of its priorities. Through working with partners throughout our authority and the White Ribbon Project, we are hoping to achieve White Ribbon status in East Ayrshire, where White Ribbon Scotland will assess and determine whether we have achieved that status. I know the work that's already been done in relation to achieving it, and hopefully by middle of the year, next year, and long before the end of it, before we come back to our next conference, we have achieved that. So, as a survivor of countless repetitive incidents of domestic abuse as a child, my dad, who had the Jekyll and Hyde personality when out socialising with his friends, would be the life and soul of the party. But when he came home, he was a different person. He would punish me constantly with a belt. I'd be slapped, punched, and in a home on a recurring basis, I would witness some of the most despicable and sickening crimes of indiscriminate violence inflicted on a woman, my mother, that no child in a civilised society should ever experience. I gladly take the opportunity today to speak at the conference. Given the opportunity through my appointment as a White Ribbon Ambassador, it allows me, from a person with that lived life experience and also with someone really important and vital to me. I have the blessing of my mother, who been fast approaching her 80th birthday, and after discussing the virtues of my role as a White Ribbon champion, said that I was to get out there and talk about our experiences and prevent what had happened to us happening to any other family. Sadly, my mother passed away in March this year, and I know she would want me to continue with our plight. So here's our story. This comes from a small child being terrified and helpless as far back as I can remember. I bear no physical scars, but the memories are as clear and as vivid as they were 50 years ago. Alcohol-fueled attacks, daytime drinking, and then the pub closed, then the violence. Nighttime drinking, the pub closes, then violence. I remember on a dark winter's night, walking 4 miles as a 10-year-old boy to beg him to come home and tend to my mum as she was in so much pain from the beating he had administered to her in the afternoon, only for him to come home and beat her again because I had disturbed his night out. Back in the 70s, in a very small mining community where no household owned a phone, we had 3 buses a day and it was 4 miles to the nearest town. I remember jumping from our house window on a wet and windy winter's night to call the police from a phone box near to our home. Lying in my bed, comforting my young brothers and sister, with our heads under the covers, again and again with recurring regularity it would start. The shouting, the blows, the screams, the tears, the bruises, the blood, the broken nose, the black eyes, the dark glasses, the ambulance, the police, and finally incarceration, a 3-month custodial sentence. At last, closure. No more pain, the suffering was over. But no, she took him back again. The shouting, the screams, the blows, the tears, the bruises, the blood, the dark glasses, the broken arm, the plaster casts, the ambulance, the police, and finally 6 months incarceration. again, she took him back. How would she cope with 4 children and no one to provide for them was the question that she kept asking herself. During the 13 years of abuse, my mother endured the vilest beatings imaginable. During this time, there was 2 attempts to overdose and take her own life before she made the best decision of her life. She finally made the decision to leave him. Standing by her side as an 11-year-old, I told my dad that I hated him and I never wanted to see him again. My dad should have been my idol, my inspiration, and I hate it. But in many ways, it was my inspiration. Before I vowed I would never behave in the manner that he chose to do so. A few years later, my mum married again and had a stepdad that worshipped her and all 4 of his stepchildren unconditionally until he passed away last year. Back in the 70s, living in that small mining community, my mother's only form of refuge came from a close neighbour's house where she would nurse her wounds and seek some kind of sanctuary and comfort from her. And sadly to say, this indeed was a two-way process at times, and our neighbour needed that comforting as well. So I'm delighted to say things have progressed and we have legislation and organisations like Women's Aid and the Violence Against Women partnerships which are now embedded in our communities to assist women in countering such horrific crimes. So moving on, 50 years from my mother's experience of violence against her, I think to myself, what a difference it would have made to us if we had had that support back in the 70s that is now available. The recent introduction in East Ayrshire of our domestic abuse policy, where in council occupied homes where there are instances of domestic abuse, support and care will be provided to victims to remain in their home, with the legislation allowing the removal of the perpetrator. So it's reassuring that councils and their partners are working collaboratively to raise awareness and encourage the reporting of domestic abuse. Making new council tenants aware of our policies and where required, assist survivors, victims to relocate if necessary. Police Scotland disclosure scheme for domestic abuse, also known as Clare's Law, gives women in a relationship the right to ask police if their partner has a history of violent or abusive behaviour. This is also extended to a friend who, if they suspect that their friend might be in a partnership with a person with recorded historic instances of domestic abuse. Checks will be made by the police and the information will be revealed where there is a reason for concern. The impact on kids living in a family where there is domestic abuse will have an impact on them for the rest of their lives. Linking in with the ACE's agenda, we know if we cannot remove kids from this kind of environment, then the likelihood is that they too will either accept the abuse or be the perpetrator of that abuse. I often tell the story many years ago when I was a wee bit green behind the ears, naive, young, and no long married. A close friend and his partner had fallen out and they had separated. So over a few drinks in his home, I'd expressed various opinions about his ex-partner's conduct, and to which he contributed much more than I did. 2 weeks later, they were back together in love again. And he had disclosed everything that we had discussed. She never spoke to me again. I learned a valuable lesson that I would never interfere or cast opinions or get involved in anyone's relationship again. The exception will always be for me where there is domestic abuse or violence within that relationship. Only 2 years ago, after lengthy conversations with a young woman who had confided in me and by description was clearly a victim of domestic abuse, after discussion and some deliberation, she did finally realise that she was being abused and suffering from coercive, controlling behaviour from her partner. Derogatory and insulting comments, and if you can please excuse my language, what you wearing that for, you fat bastard? Count yourself lucky you've got me. Nobody else would look at you bar me. checking her phone for messages, depriving her of money, not allowing her out socially. So she decided to leave him. I now see a happy young woman in a loving relationship. You're probably all aware of the horrific statistics surrounding domestic violence against women, and I don't intend to cover them today, as I suspect they will be covered later on in the conference at some point. More recent data tells us that since the introduction of coercive control law in April last year and the added impact of restrictions during COVID-19, there have been many, many more interventions by Police Scotland. So it's reassuring that councils, their partners, police, and awareness is raised to encourage the reporting of domestic abuse. We know I've discussed earlier that the options it's now open to tenants and them remaining in their home. I think that we will all leave here today with the message that we will not tolerate domestic abuse. So going back to the only person I have ever hated during my lifetime, my dad. And after discussion with my wife and my daughters and my mother, I made her aware that it was my intention to meet him after 40 years of not seeing him. He had moved away from the district many, many years ago, but I had been made aware that he had recently returned. The reason behind this was to try and remove the hatred that lived within me all these years. So the meeting place was a venue. My daughter was a singer, and she was entertaining this day, and I was there with my wife and my other daughter. And as the hall filled up, I happened to glance across the hall, and I could identify the guy that was sitting at the table alone as my dad. So obviously time had moved on. He seemed old, frail, but it was my dad, and when I saw him I started shaking. I'd said to my wife and my daughters that my dad was there. They'd never saw him or met him in their lives. And without hesitation, it was more or less in sync that they had said that, you know what you've got to do. I was shaking. And I found it very, very difficult, but I did pluck up the courage. I found out what he was drinking, and I asked if I could join him. He said yes, without knowing who it was that asked, and when I sat down in front of him, I said, I take it you'll recognise me? He says, of course I do, James, of course I do. So, I never discussed anything with him during that brief 10-minute conversation that we had about the past. But I knew, looking in his eyes, I could sense the remorse. I could sense that he knew by looking around him what he had missed because of his actions. And I got a sense of satisfaction in a way in knowing that, but the bigger issue for me was having that discussion and looking into his eyes. I felt the weight of the world lifting off my shoulders. That hatred that I'd held all the years was gone. It was gone. My biological dad died 8 years ago, and I was at his side when he passed away. I called my wife to let her know of his passing, and I started crying uncontrollably during that call. I still ask myself why. The reasons why I did it, was it because what he should have did and didn't do, what it could have been and should have been? I don't know. So through my role as ambassador and after delivering a speech at Community Justice Ayrshire event on gender-based violence in a modern world, I was contacted by a young freelance journalist based in Inverness who wanted to interview me. Poppy Joy Watson was the 2019 winner of the Right to End Violence Against Women Awards bursary. These awards are led by Zero Tolerance Scotland and involve a number of violence against women and girls organisations and charities, including White Ribbon Scotland. They exist to promote informed writing and journalism and other circles on the subjects of gender equality and violence against women and girls. Poppy's bursary win meant that she's been sponsored by the awards to work with the Daily Record throughout the year to write and publish 6 articles on these subjects. The article that she had written was published in August, which gave me the opportunity to highlight the issues surrounding domestic violence once again. We have a 16-day campaign, but I will continue to promote the Violence Against Women campaign at every opportunity I have throughout the year. Simple things like wearing my ribbon throughout the year may prompt that question, what's the ribbon for, Jim? Giving me that opportunity again to highlight the campaign and the issues around it. So I will do that throughout the year, every opportunity I get. So off the back of the newspaper article in August, I received an email from someone who had read the piece in the newspaper and asked me if he could pass a poem he had written on to me. It was a housing officer assisting homeless families for 12 years and wrote from that experience. The poem is one from his now published book, and it's entitled A Poet's Dream. He wrote it in support of those working their way through some of the experiences my family had endured and I had outlined in the article. The poem is called It's a Domestic, and I'm going to read it to you now. There are no hollows in your pillows. Discarded clothes no longer litter the floor. Beer does not take all the fridge space. Now you don't live here anymore. I do not hide in the bedroom. Kids are not afraid in the hall. No longer shiver with fear when they hear their father call. There is money to pay for the heating. Rent is now being paid on time. You are at the pleasure of Her Majesty, and I hope you suffer for your crime. My crime was to love you, to fear you, and allow you to rule, to accept the beatings and the threats as you became even more cruel. I do not hide in the bedroom. Kids are not afraid in the hall. I no longer shiver with fear when they hear their father call. Love should never mean pain, threats nor fear be a call. If fear be the overwhelming emotion, you're best be rid of it all. I do not hide in the bedroom, and I can stand at the top of my stairs. Embrace the love of my children. Now you are no longer there. Pretty well sums it up in a poem. That poem was written by a gentleman called Kit Duddy. So, that just leaves me to say thank you very much for listening to me today. And one more thing. If you suspect incidents of violence against women and girls or domestic abuse in any shape or form, please, 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 if you see something or suspect something is wrong, please, please say something. So I'm going to conclude for today, and thank you for listening to me. If I can now guide you to your 3 asks, which is the next agenda on your paper, with your task that you have to do. I'm going to leave you and love you and hope you enjoy the rest of your conference. Thank you very much.